The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street, Chapter 21. But let's see what happened in Chapter 20. Remember, they had the Christmas Eve dinner, and up at Miss Josie and Mr. Jeet's, and everybody was not having a super good time because they're so sad about them having to move. But then Lainey and Mr. Jeet did the tricks with Paganini, and Paganini did so good, everybody was super excited and clapping and everything. And then remember, the Biederman was banging on the floor, and Miss Josie said that sometimes he does that when he thinks that they're being too loud. And then remember, Isa ran up there with her violin and played a really mean kind of song, and he opened the door and was watching her, and then she played a nicer song, and then she yelled at him about being mean to them, and then he said, "I'm sorry," and then he closed the door. Okay, Chapter 21. Isa descended the staircase with heavy footsteps while her family and friends watched in silence. But the moment her feet touched the second floor landing, she found herself embraced from all sides by Hyacinth and Lainey, by Oliver and Mr. Van Houten, by her parents, and Mr. Jeet and Miss Josie and Auntie Harrigan and Uncle Arthur. "What happened?" yelled Arthur impatiently, pulling at her arm. "Were you scared, Isa? You saw him, right? He looked like a werewolf, right?" Hyacinth asked, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Are you okay, honey?" asked Papa. He cupped Isa's chin in concern. "That was the most excellent les fleurs I have ever heard," Mr. Van Houten said, wiping tears from the corners of his eyes. "I wish you would play like that in your lessons." Remember, that's her violin teacher. Miss Josie ushered Isa inside the apartment while Mr. Jeet patted Isa's hand. The only person who didn't have a word to say or a hug to give was Jessie. In fact, she had disappeared. After looking around the living room, Isa wandered into the kitchen in search of her. A movement out the open window caught her eye. Isa stuck her head out the window, then climbed onto the fire escape. "Hi," Jessie said. She was sitting on the first step. The wind and rain had stopped, but fat drops fell onto her head from the tree branch. "Hi," Isa said, lifting her eyes to look up at the water wall. Pieces of tubing were torn from the wall, and 2 water wheels and all the wind chimes were missing. "Damage from the storm," Jessie said, watching Isa survey the destruction. There was a long pause. "You were awesome up there," Jessie finally said. Isa didn't reply. "Isa, please." Isa shook her head. "I want to know why you did it." Jessie swallowed, then stared down at her scuffed sneakers. "I never meant to hurt you. I honestly didn't think you wanted to go to the dance. And when I found out that you did want to go, I don't know, I felt like I was losing you. It scared me even more than moving." She finally looked up. "Jessie." Isa trailed off before stepping closer to her. "You'll always be stuck with me." Jessie looked up, her eyes hopeful. "I'm still upset," Isa informed her. "I don't know if I have forgiven you yet." "I'll make it up to you," Jessie promised. "I'll cook Tuesday's dinners for the next month." Isa contemplated. Then she shook her head and crossed her arms over her chest. "I've been wronged," she said. "I don't know if I'll ever recover." "Okay, fine. I'll clean the bathroom when it's your turn." "For how long?" "A month." Isa fixed her eyes on a point beyond Jessie's shoulder. "Fine, 3 months." Isa finally cracked a tiny smile. "Okay. Okay to what?" "Okay to everything." Papa cleared his throat. "Please, may I give a toast?" When the room quieted, he lifted his wineglass. "We have loved living here. I cannot imagine better neighbors." He nodded to Miss Josie and Mr. Jeet. "Better family." Then to Auntie Harrigan and Uncle Arthur. "Or a better teacher." And finally to Mr. Van Houten. "I have always believed that raising kids means more than just being a good parent and trying to do the right things." Papa went on, his voice beginning to wobble. It means surrounding your kids with amazing people who can bring science experiments and jam cookies, laughter and joy, and beautiful experiences into their lives. From every part of my being, I want to thank you for giving me and my family the gifts of friendship and love. Miss Josie cried into a lace handkerchief, and Mr. Jeet hiccuped as tears pooled in his eyes. Mr. Van Houten blew his nose into a dinner napkin, and Auntie Harrigan wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Uncle Arthur disguised his own tears by picking up Laney and burying his head in her neck. Isa looked at her siblings. Operation Biederman had officially failed. But beneath the sadness, her heart felt too big for her body. We didn't win over the Biederman, Isa said, but this made me realize that home is much more than a place. She smiled at her siblings. It's good to be a Vanderbeeker, wherever we live. With the speeches done, Laney ran around distributing hugs and kisses, and soon everyone drifted back to the dining room table, taking another helping of food now that appetites had returned. As people finished off dinner and started in on dessert, Isa cleared the table of dirty dishes and was on her way to the kitchen when Mr. Van Houten pulled her aside. Isa, I must tell you something about Mr. Biederman. What about the Biederman? Asked Oliver, who was walking by with a piece of chocolate cake as big as the plate it was on. Are you talking about the Biederman? Jessie called from the kitchen. Don't talk about the Biederman without us, Hyacinth said, pulling Laney away from the dessert table, where she was sticking her fingers into the carrot cake frosting. Mr. Van Houten took a stack of dishes out of Isa's hand and set them on the side table. I didn't know, Mr. Van Houten said, his voice lowering, that your landlord was Mr. Biederman. The kids held their breath. I knew him a long time ago, Mr. Van Houten began. I didn't even remember that this was the building he lived in. He stopped abruptly. We know about his wife and daughter, Isa said, about the car accident. What car accident? Jessie and Oliver and Hyacinth and Laney said at the same time. Mrs. Castleman gave me a newspaper article about it, Isa said. They died in a car accident. Mr. Van Houten breathed a sigh of relief. So you know about that. But what you might not know is that his daughter, Luciana, was a violinist. She was my student. A violinist? The kids echoed. She was very talented. Isa, you have always reminded me a little of Luciana, especially when you were younger. Creepy, breathed Jessie. The kids nodded in agreement. Well, I wanted to tell you that the violin you've been playing, you know, it's been in my family for many generations, right? Well, I had lent Luciana that violin too, but then when she died, Mr. Van Houten paused, well, her father didn't want anything around that reminded him of his daughter, so he returned it. It's been sitting in my closet, shut away, until you came along. Isa let out a breath. She didn't know she was holding. I thought you should know. Mr. Van Houten's voice sounded as though it were coming from far away, as though he were talking to her from the other end of a long tunnel. The Biederman's daughter. Mr. Van Houten's violin. Isa's violin. Luciana's violin. Luciana touched the same wood, feeling the same vibrations, hearing the same sounds. And just like that, the story clicked together. When the last of the guests had gone and Miss Josie and Mr. Jeet's apartment was returned to its original condition, Mama and Papa gathered the children and ushered them downstairs to get ready for bed. Isa changed into her pajamas before heading to the bathroom to brush her teeth. Jessie and Oliver were already there, and Oliver mumbled something with a mouthful of frothy toothpaste. What did you say? Isa asked. Oliver spit. I feel sorry for the Biederman, Oliver repeated. I never thought I would say this, but I feel sorry for him too, Jessie said, rinsing her toothbrush under the faucet. I wish you could have seen his face when I went up there, Isa said, as she squeezed toothpaste onto her toothbrush. When he opened the door, his face was all red from yelling and being mad, but when I finished playing the swan, His face had turned so white. I've never seen anyone look like that before, like he had seen a ghost. Oliver rinsed his mouth. He sort of did see a ghost, the ghost of Luciana. He shook his head. Geez, that's so creepy. That's so weird that she played violin with Mr. Van Houten too, Isa said, with the exact same violin. Did you know that violin has a different sound from other violins? The wood is so old it makes this really beautiful ringing sound. The Biederman must have recognized the violin. When Mr. Van Houten said the Biederman didn't want anything that reminded him of his daughter, I felt this chill. Now I feel terrible going up there and playing the same violin his daughter did right in his face. Like I was throwing all these bad memories at him. Jessie put her arms around Isa and Oliver. You didn't know. Anyway, it's probably best we're leaving, so he can have some peace. I spent so much time avoiding him, and now all I want to do is make him feel better. Me too, Isa said. Me too, echoed Oliver. Not too much later, the twins were alone in their bedroom, snuggled under their thick comforters. I guess this is it, Isa said, the last Christmas Eve in the brownstone. The pipes that carried heat to the radiators banged restlessly within the walls. Do you think we should do anything else for the Biederman, now that we know? Jessie trailed off. Isa looked over at her violin sitting on her desk. I think the only thing we can do now is give him what he wanted all this time. Peace. I keep thinking about how he lost his whole family in one night, Jessie murmured from her burrow beneath the blankets. I can't stop thinking about it. Isa reached over to turn off the lamp next to her bed. Darkness took over the room. Me too. Good night, Isa. Good night, Jessie. Isa lay back in her bed and gazed at the familiar sights. There was the crack in the shape of Eastern Europe on the ceiling. There was the light that fell in the long rectangle onto the floor between their beds from the street lamp right outside their window. There was the warm air from the radiator making the right side of her comforter toasty and cozy. There was the whoosh of a car heading down the street. There was Jessie, her breathing becoming steady and deep as she drifted off to sleep. There were the rough grooves of the bricks lining the wall behind her headboard. There was the whistling of the pipes in the walls of the brownstone. There was the sound of her parents' low murmuring as they climbed the stairs and quietly peeked into the kids' bedrooms. There was the sound of a distant car alarm and a dog's bark. This was home, and soon there would be goodbye. Dawn, dawn, dawn.